Well, howdy, and welcome to another edition of Rail Fan Robert's Reading Railroad.
Chapter 15 The Tower Search. When the Hardy boys reached the Tower mansion at 4 o'clock, the door was opened by Herd Applegate himself. The tall, stooped gentleman peered at them through his thick lensed glasses. In one hand, he held a sheet of stamps. Yes, he said, seemingly annoyed at being disturbed. You remember us, don't you? Frank asked politely. We're Mr. Hardy's sons. Fenton Hardy, the detective. Oh, yes. Well, what do you want? We would like to look through the old tower, if you don't mind. We have a clue about the robbery. What kind of clue? We have evidence that leads us to believe the jewels and bonds were hidden by the thief in the old tower. Oh, you have evidence, don't you? The elder man peered at the boys close. It's that rascal Robinson. I'll warrant who gave it to you. He hid the stuff and now he's suggesting where you might find it just to clear himself. Frank and Joe had not considered the affair in this light. As they gazed at Mr. Applegate in consternation, at last Joe spoke up. Mr. Robinson has nothing to do with this. The real thief was found. He said the loot was hidden in the old tower. If you will just let us take a look around, we'll find it for you. Yeah, who was the real thief? We'd rather not tell you until we found the stolen property. Then we'll reveal the whole story. Mr. Applegate took off his glasses and wiped them with his handkerchief. He stared at the boy suspiciously for a few moments. Then he called out, Adela? From the dim interior of the hallway, a high feminine voice answered, What do you want? Come here a minute. Well, there was a rustle of skirts, and Alida Applegate appeared, a faded blonde woman of thin features. She was dressed in a fashion of 15 years before, in which every color of the spectrum fought for supremacy. What's the matter? She demanded. I can't sit down to do a bit of sewing without you interrupting me, Herd. These boys want to look through the old tower. What for? Up to some mischief? Frank and Joe feared she would not give her consent. Frank said quickly, We're doing some work for our dad, the detective Fenton Hardy. Think they can find the jewels and bonds in the old tower, Herd Applegate explained. Oh, they do they? The woman said icily. And what would the bonds and jewels be doing in the old tower? We have evidence that they were hidden there after the robbery. Mrs. Applegate viewed the boys with obvious suspicion, as if any thief would be silly enough to hide them right in the house he robbed, she said in a tone of finality. We're just trying to help you, Joe put in courageously. Go ahead then, Miss Applegate, with a sigh. But if you tear the old tower to pieces, you won't find anything. It's all foolishness. Frank and Joe followed Herd Applegate through the gloomy halls and corridors that led through the old tower. He said he was inclined to share his sister's opinion that the boys' search would be in vain. And we'll make a try at it anyway, Mr. Applegate, Frank said. Don't ask me to help you. I got a bad knee. Anyway, I just received some new stamps this afternoon. You interrupted me when I was sorting them. I must get back to my work. Well, they had reached a corridor that was heavily covered with dust. It apparently had not been in use for a long time and was bare and unfurnished. At the end was a heavy door. It was unlocked, and when Mr. Applegate opened it, the boy saw a square room. Almost in the center of it rose a flight of wooden stairs with a heavily ornamented balustrade. The stairway twisted and turned to the roof 5 floors above. Opening from each floor was a room. "There you are," Mr. Applegate announced. "Search all you want to, but you won't find anything of that, I'm certain." With his parting remark, he turned and hobbled back along the corridor, or a sheet of stamps still in his gnarled hand. The Hardy boys looked at each other. "Not very encouraging, is he? He doesn't deserve to get his stuff back," Frank declared flatly, then shrugged. "Let's get up to the tower and start the search." Frank and Joe first examined the dusty stairs carefully for footprints, but none were to be seen. "That seems queer," Frank remarked. "If Jackley was here recently, you'd think his footprints would still show. But judging by this dust, there hasn't been anyone in the tower for at least a year." "Perhaps the dust collects more quickly than we think," Joe countered. "Or the wind may get in here and blow it around." An inspection of the first floor of the old tower revealed that there was no place where the loot could have been hidden except under the stairs, but they found nothing there. The boys ascended to the next floor and entered the room on the left of the stairwell. It was as drab and bare as the one they had just left. Here again, and the dust lay thick, and the murky windows were almost obscured with cobwebs. There was an atmosphere of age and decay about the entire place, as if it had been abandoned for years. "Nothing here," Frank said after a quick glance around. "On we go." They made their way up to the next floor. After searching this room and under the stairway, they had to admit defeat. The floor above was a duplicate of the first and second. It was bare and cheerless. Deep in dust, there was not the slightest sign of a hiding place, or any indication that another human being had been in the tower for a long time. "Doesn't look very promising, Joe." "Oh, still, Jackley may have gone right to the top of the tower." The search continued without success till the boys reached the roof. Here a trap door which swung inward led up to the top of the tower. Frank unlatched it and pulled on the door. It did not budge. "I'll help you," Joe offered. Together the brothers yanked on the stubborn trap door of the old. Suddenly it gave way completely, causing both boys to lose their balance. Frank fell backward down the stairway. Joe, with a cry, toppled over the railing into space. Frank grabbed a spindle of the balustrade and kept himself from sliding further down the steps. Seen Joe plunge and expected the next moment to hear a sickening thud on the floor 5 stories below. "Joe," he murmured as he pulled himself up. "Oh, Joe." To Frank's amazement, he had heard no thud, and now looking over the balustrade, his brother was not lying unconscious at the bottom of the tower. Instead, he was clinging to 2 spindles of the stairway a floor below. Frank, heaving a deep, tremendous sigh of relief, ran down and helped pull Joe to the safety of the steps. Both boys sat down to catch their breaths as they recovered from their falls. Finally, Joe said, "Thanks. For a second, I sure thought I was going to end my career as a detective right here." "I guess you can thank our gym teacher for the tricks he taught you on the bars," Frank remarked. "You must have grabbed those spindles with flash camera speed." Presently, the boys turned their eyes upward. An expression halfway between a grin and a worried frown crossed their faces. "Mr. Applegate," Joe remarked, "isn't going to like hearing we ruined his trap door. No, let's see if we can put it back in place." The boys climbed the stairway and examined the damage. They found that the hinges had pulled away from rotted wood. A new piece would have to be put in to hold the door in place. Before we go downstairs, said Joe, let's look on the roof. We thought maybe the loot was hidden there, remember? Frank and Joe climbed outside to a narrow railing walk that ran around the four sides of the square tower. There was nothing on it. Our only reward for all this work is a good view of Bayport, Frank remarked ruefully. Below lay the bustling little city, and to the east was Barmet Bay, its sparkling waters in the late afternoon. Dad was fooled by Jackley, I guess, Frank said slowly. There hasn't been anyone in this old tower for years. The boys gazed moodily over the city, then down at the grounds of Tower Mansion. The many roofs of the house itself were far below. Oh, and directly across from them rose the heavy bulk of the new tower. Do you think Jackley might have meant the new tower? Frank exclaimed suddenly. Dad said he specified the old one, but he must have been mistaken. Even the new one looks old. Let's ask Mr. Applegate if we can search the new tower, too. It's worth trying anyway, but I'm afraid when we tell him about the trap door, he'll say no. The brothers went down through the opening. They lifted the door into place, latched it, then wedged Frank's small pocket notebook into the damaged side. The door held, but Frank and Joe knew that the wind or rain could easily dislodge it. The boys hurried down the steps and through the corridor to the main part of the house. Adelia Applegate popped her head out of a doorway. Wait, where's the loot? She asked. We didn't find any. The woman sniffed. I told you, such a waste of time. We think now that the stolen property is probably hidden in the new tower. Or, in the new tower? Mrs. Applegate cried out. Absurd. I suppose you want to go picking through there now. If it wouldn't be too much trouble. It would be too much trouble indeed, she shrilled. I haven't ashamed to have boys running through my house on a wild goose chase like this. Better leave at once and forget all this nonsense. Her voice attracted the attention of Herd Applegate, who came hobbling out of his stood. Now what's the matter? He demanded. Sister told him, and suddenly his face creased in a triumphant smile. Ha, so you didn't find anything after all. You thought you could clear Robinson, but you haven't done it. Not yet. These boys have the audacity, Mrs. Applegate broke in, to go walk looking through the new tower. Miss Hurt Applegate stared at the boy. Well, they can't do it, he snapped. You boys tried to make a fool of me, said, shaking a fist at him. Frank and Joe exchanged glances and nodded at each other. They would have to reveal their reason for thinking the loot was in the new tower. Mr. Applegate, the information about your stolen stuff is hidden came from the man who took the jewels and the bonds, and it wasn't Mr. Robinson. What? You mean it was someone else? Has he been caught? He was captured, but he's dead now. Dead? What happened? Herd Applegate asked in excitement. His name was Red Jackley, and he was a notorious criminal. Dad got on his trail, and Jackley tried to escape on a railroad handcar. Smashed, and he was fatally injured. Where did you get your information then? And Mr. Applegate asked. Frank told the whole story, ending with, we thought Jackley might have made a mistake, and that it's in the new tower where he hid the loot. Hurt Applegate rubbed his chin meditatively. It was evident he was impressed by the boy's story. So this fellow Jackley confessed to the robbery, eh? He admitted everything. He had once worked around here and knew the Bayport area well. He'd been hanging around the city for several days before the robbery. Well, if he said he hid the stuff in the old tower, it's not there. It must be in the new tower, as you say. Will you let us search it? Urgent. Yes, and I'll help. I'm just as eager to find the jewels and bonds as you are. Come on, boys. Herd Applegate led the way across the mansion toward a door, which opened to a new tower. Now that the man was in a good mood, Frank decided this was an opportune time to tell him about the trap door. He did so, offered to pay for the repair. There. Oh, that's all right, Mr. Applegate said. I'll have it fixed. In fact, Oh, I forgot. I'll get a carpenter. He said no more, but quickened his steps, and Joe grinned. Well, Mr. Applegate had not even reprimanded them. The mansion owner opened the door to the new tower and stepped into a corridor. Frank and Joe, tingling with excitement, followed. All right. Chapter 16. A Surprise. The rooms in the new tower had been furnished when it was built, but only on rare occasions when the Applegates had visitors were the rooms occupied, the owner stated. In the first one, Frank, Joe, and Mr. Applegate found nothing, although they looked carefully in closets, bureaus, highboys, and under the large pieces of furniture. They even turned up mattresses and rugs. When they were satisfied the loot had not been hidden there, they ascended the stairs to the room above. Again, their investigation proved fruitless. Mr. Applegate, being a tempered man, fell back into his old mood. The boy's story had convinced him, but when they had searched the room and the towers without success, he showed his disgust. It's a hoax, he snorted. Adele was right. I've been made a fool of, and all because of Robinson. I can't understand it, Joe burst out. Jackley said he hid the stuff in the tower. That fellow did hide the jewels and bonds in one of the towers, Applegate surmised. Someone else may have come in and taken them. Someone working with him. Or else Robin found the loot right after the robbery and kept it for himself. I'm sure Mr. Robinson wouldn't do that, Joe objected. Then where did he get his $900? Explain that. Robinson won't. On the way back to the main part of the mansion, Herd Applegate elaborated on his theory. The fact that the loot had not been found seemed to convince him all over again that Robinson was involved in some way. Not like as not he was in league with Jackley, the man stated flatly. Again, Frank and Joe protested that the ex-caretaker did not hobnob with criminals. Nevertheless, the Hardys were puzzled, disappointed, and alarmed. Their search had only resulted in implicating Mr. Robinson more deeply in the mystery. Back in the hallway of the main house, they met Adela Applegate, who cried triumphantly when she saw the search party return empty handed. Didn't I tell you? She cried. Herd Applegate, you've let these boys make a fool of you. She escorted the Hardys to the front door while her brother, shaking his head perplexed, went back to his study. We've messed things up, Frank, Joe declared as they walked toward their motorcycles. Feel like a dud rocket. Me too. They hurried home to tell their father the disappointing news. Fenton Hardy was amazed to hear that the stolen valuables had not been located in either tower. You're sure you went over that place thoroughly? Every inch of it. There wasn't a sign of the loot from the dust in the old tower. I'd say no one been there for ages, Frank replied. Strange, the detective muttered. I'm sure Jackley wasn't lying. He absolutely had nothing to gain by deceiving me. I hid it in the old tower. Those were his very words. And what could he mean but the old tower of Tower Mansion? And why should he be so careful to say the old tower? Since he was familiar with Bayport, he probably knew that the mansion had two towers, the old one and the new one. But of course, it may be we didn't search thoroughly enough, Joe remarked. The loot could have been hidden under the flooring or behind some movable wall panel. We didn't look there. That's the only solution, Mr. Hardy agreed. I'm still not satisfied that the stolen property isn't there. I'm going to ask Applegate to permit another search of both towers. Now I think your mother wants you to do an errand downtown. Mrs. Hardy explained that she wanted Frank and what she wanted, and Frank and Joe were soon on their motorcycles again. When the boys reached the business section of Bayport, they found that Jackley's confession had already become known. The local radio station had broadcast it in the afternoon news program. People everywhere were discussing it. Detective Smuff walked along the street, looking as if he would bite the head off the first person who mentioned the case to him. When he saw the Hardy boys, he glowered. "Well," he grunted, "I hear you got the stuff back." "I wish we had," Frank said glumly. "What?" the detective cried out, brightening at once. "You didn't get it? I thought they said on the radio this fellow Jackley had told Father where he hid it." "He did, but how did the news leak out?" "Jackley's door wasn't closed all the time. One of the other patients who was walking by the room could hear the confession and spilled it." "So you didn't find the loot at all? Ha ha! It's a good one. Didn't Jackley say the stuff was hidden in the old tower? What more do you need?" "Well, it wasn't there," Joe retorted hotly. "Jackley must have made a mistake." "Jackley made a mistake?" Smuff continued cheerfully. "It looks like the joke's on you fellows and your father." The would-be sleuth went on down the street, chuckling to himself. Frank and Joe returned home. They found that Mr. Applegate had been in touch with Mr. Applegate. He had convinced him that a more detailed search of the towers would be advisable. "Boys, we'll go directly after supper. I think we better not wait until tomorrow." At 7 o'clock, the detective and his sons presented themselves at the Tower mansion again. Mr. Hurd Applegate met him at the door. "I'm letting you make this search," he said as he led them to the old tower. "But I'm convinced you won't find anything. Talked the case over with Chief Colling. He's inclined to think that Robinson behind it all, and I'm sure he is." "What about Jackley's confession?" Mr. Hardy asked. "Chief says that could be a blind. Jackley did it to protect Robinson. They were working together." "I know it looks bad for Robinson," Mr. Hardy admitted, "but I want to give the towers another close examination. I heard Jackley make the confession, and I don't believe he was lying. Maybe, but I'm telling you it was a hoax." "I'll believe that only if I don't find anything in or outside either tower," Mr. Hardy declared, his mouth set with a grim line. "Well, come on, let's get started," Hurd Applegate said, unlocking the door leading to the old tower. Nearly the force set to work. They started at the top of the old tower, worked downward. Their investigation left no possibility untouched. The walls were tapped for hollow sounds, which might indicate secret hiding places. The floors were examined closely for signs of any recent disturbance to the wood. But the missing jewels and bonds were not located. Finally, the group reached the ground floor again. "Nothing to do but go on to the old new tower," Mr. Hardy commented briefly. "I'll have to rest and eat something before I do any more," Hurd Applegate said wearily. He led the way to the dining room where sandwiches and milk had been set out. "Help yourselves," he invited. He himself took only crackers and milk when they sat down. After a brief stop for refreshment, the Hardys and the Tower mansion owner turned their attention to the new tower. Again, they searched carefully. Walls and partitions were tapped. Floors were examined. Floors were sounded. Every bit of furniture was minutely examined. Not an inch of space escaped the scrutiny of the detective and his helpers. As the search drew to a close and the loot still had not been found, Mr. Hardy remarked, "Certainly looks as if the stolen property was never hidden here by Jackley. Furthermore, there's no evidence that if he did hide it here, anyone came in to take it away. You mean, said Frank, it's proof that Mr. Robinson did not come in here? Exactly. Maybe not, Mr. Applegate conceded. It still doesn't prove he wasn't in cahoots with the thief. I'm not going to give up this search yet, Mr. Hardy said determinedly. Absolute was hidden somewhere outside the old tower. He explained that it would be difficult to examine the grounds properly at night. With your permission, Mr. Applegate, my sons and I will return at sunrise tomorrow morning and start work again. As the owner reluctantly nodded his assent, Mr. Hardy turned to Frank and Joe and smiled. We ought to be able to prove our point before school time. The Hardys, who had no time to prepare any homework, reminded their father that a note from him to the principal would be a great help. The detective smiled, and as soon as they reached home, he wrote one out and said good night. Frank and Joe felt as if their eyes had hardly closed when they opened them again to see their father standing between their beds. Time to get up if you want to be in on the search, he announced. The boys blinked sleepily, then sprang out of bed. Showers awakened them fully, and they dressed quickly. Mrs. Hardy was in the kitchen when they entered, and breakfast was ready. Sun was just rising over a distant hill. Everything's hot this morning, Mrs. Hardy said. It's chilly outside. The menu included hot applesauce, oatmeal, poached eggs on toast, Coca-Cola, or hot cocoa. Breakfast was eaten almost in silence to avoid any delay. Within 20 minutes, the three Hardy sleuths were on their way. I see you put spades in the car, Dad, Frank remarked. Tell you we're going to do some digging. Yes, if we don't locate the loot hidden above ground someplace. When the Hardys reached Tower Mansion, they instituted their hunt without notifying the Applegates, who they were sure were still asleep. Everything in the vicinity of both towers was scrutinized. Boulders were overturned, the space under the summer house examined by flashlight, every stone in the masonry tested to see if it had been dislodged. Not a clue turned up. I guess we dig, Frank stated finally. He chose a bed of perennial bushes at the foot of the old tower where there had been recent planting and pushed one of the spades in deep with his foot. The tool hit an obstruction. Excitedly, Frank shoveled away the dirt around the spot, and in half a minute he gave a cry of delight. A chest! I found a buried chest!
No part of this episode may be reproduced without my personal permission. Railfan Roberts Reading Railroad is a production of Raccoon Gaming Rails Railroad Productions, and all podcast episodes are owned by Raccoon Gaming Rails Railroad Productions.